Everyone in that little town had a theory about the old general store on the corner of Mill and Vine, and every single theory agreed on one thing, which was that the great cast-iron safe bricked into its back wall was empty, had always been empty, and was nothing but 100 years of dead weight that no sensible person would ever waste a thought on. They told her so the very first day she signed the papers. They told her so when she swept the floors, and when she scraped the grime off the front windows, and when she stood out on the sidewalk with her hands on her hips, looking up at the faded painted sign nobody had been able to read since before she was born. "The safe is empty, honey," they said, smiling the way people smile when they think they are saving a young woman from her own foolishness. The Hadley boys cleaned it out in the 40s. Old man Crail, who ran the place, was broke when he died. There's nothing in that wall but rust and regret. And she nodded and thanked them and smiled right back. And she kept her own counsel, because she had spent one quiet hour with that safe before she ever signed a thing, and in that hour the safe had told her something the whole town had forgotten how to hear. So when I tell you that on a cold night that winter, alone in that empty store with a single work lamp burning, she finally got the door of that bricked-up safe to swing open, and what was behind it was worth more than the building, more than the whole block, more than anything she had dared to let herself imagine. You should know that not one soul in that town would have believed it of her. They had all walked past that safe their whole lives and called it nothing. She was the only one who had stopped to ask. Let me tell you how she came to own it, because the building matters as much as the safe does. She was 34 years old that autumn, and she had just lost the thing that had held her life together, which was a man she had been married to for 11 years, and who had decided, without much warning and with even less kindness, that he would rather be somewhere else. He took the good car and the savings and most of the furniture and left her the rest, and the rest was not very much. She had grown up 2 counties over and had no particular reason to go anywhere, so when she saw the listing for the old store, sold for back taxes, going for less than a used car, she drove out to look at it on a gray Saturday with nothing in her heart but a vague, stubborn need to put her hands on something solid. The town was the kind of place the highway had forgotten, a single main street of brick storefronts, half of them shuttered, a feed mill, a diner, a church, and at the end of it, the general store standing on its corner like an old man who has outlived everyone he ever knew. The realtor was a tired woman who clearly thought the whole errand was a waste of a Saturday. She rattled the key in the swollen door and shoved it open with her shoulder and stood back to let the cold, dead air come breathing out at them. Dust and old wood and something faintly sweet underneath. The ghost of a century of penny candy and pipe tobacco and bolts of cloth. And the young woman stepped inside, and she felt the whole place settle around her like it had been waiting. There was a long oak counter, worn pale where 10,000 hands had rested. There were shelves climbing to the high, pressed tin ceiling, most of them empty now, a few still holding the husks of what the store had been, a dusty patent medicine bottle, a coil of rope, a wooden crate of nothing. There was a pot-belly stove cold in the center of the room with a ring of mismatched chairs around it, where the old men of the town must have sat through 50 winters, arguing about weather and crops and the foolishness of the young. And there, set into the back wall behind the counter, mortared into the brick so it had become part of the building itself, was the safe. She knew the moment she saw it that she would buy the place, though she did not say so out loud, because she had learned from a hard year that the things you want most are the things you must never let other people see you wanting. The safe was magnificent in the way that only old industrial iron can be. It stood taller than she did, a great square block of black cast iron with a face like a closed mouth, and across the front of it, faded but still legible, was a hand-painted scene, a pastoral thing of green hills and a gold sun, the kind of thing the safe companies of the last century used to paint on their doors to make a thing built for fear look like a thing built for hope. The dial in the center was a heavy brass affair gone green with age, and below it the great handle that should have thrown the bolts had rusted into a single frozen piece, fused to the door by 100 years of damp. It did not look like a thing that opened. It looked like a thing that had decided long ago to keep whatever it knew to itself forever. The realtor saw her looking and gave a little laugh. "Empty," she said, like she was reading from a script the whole town had memorized. Everybody knows it. Been welded shut by rust since before the war. The fellow who ran the place lost everything in the crash and never put a dime in a safe again. Just used it to hold the door up, folks say. You could try to get a locksmith out, but it'd cost you more than the building, and there's nothing in it anyhow. And the young woman ran her palm across the cold painted iron, across those little faded hills and that little gold sun, and she felt something that she could not have explained to the realtor or to anyone, a kind of held breath in the metal, a tension, the way a wound spring feels different from a slack one even through a closed case. She did not say any of that. She just said, "I'll take it." They were so sure, you see. That was the thing she kept turning over in her mind in the weeks after, as she cleaned and scraped and made the place livable, sleeping on a cot in the back room with the safe looming over her like a silent witness. The whole town was so absolutely sure that the safe was empty, and not one of them had any actual knowledge of it. It was a thing everybody knew and nobody had checked, which she had come to understand is the most dangerous kind of knowing there is. She got the story in pieces from the old men who started drifting back to their chairs around the stove once she got it lit again, glad of a warm room and a young person to tell their stories to. The man who had built the store, Old Man Crail, had run it for 50 years. A careful man, they said, a quiet man, a man who trusted nobody and nothing after the banks failed and took the savings of half the county in a single black week. He had been a young man then, and the failure had marked him the way a hard frost marks a tree, deep in the grain where you cannot see it. But it changes everything that grows after. He had stopped trusting banks entirely after that, the old man said, and run his whole business on cash and credit and a ledger he kept in his own crabbed hand. And he had bricked that safe into his wall the year after the crash, and nobody had ever once seen him open it. When he died, an old bachelor with no children, the few distant relatives who came to pick over the place had pried at the safe for an afternoon, found it frozen solid, decided he had been too poor to have anything worth locking up, and let it go with the building. That was the story. That was the whole foundation of the town's certainty. A poor old man and an empty safe. But she had sat with that safe in the quiet, and she had thought about it the way the town never had. A man who trusted nobody. a man who had watched the banks steal everything and had sworn never again, a man who ran 50 years of business in cash and lived like a miser and died with empty pockets that everyone could see. Where, she asked herself, lying on her cot in the dark, does a man like that put 50 years of careful money? Not in a bank. He'd sooner have burned it, not in a mattress where any thief could find it. He puts it in the one place he is sure, absolutely sure, that no thief and no banker and no greedy relative will ever get into, behind a foot of cast iron and a wall of brick, behind a dial whose number he carries in his head and tells to no living soul. And then he lets the rust do the rest, lets the whole world come to believe the safe is empty, because a safe everyone believes is empty is safer than any vault on earth. She did not know it. She could not have known it. But she felt it, the way she had felt it that first gray Saturday, the held breath in the iron, and she decided that before she did one more thing to that building, she was going to find out for certain, one way or the other, whether the town was right or whether she was. She tried the easy ways first, the way anyone would. She wrote down the dial as it sat and tried to turn it, and it would not budge. 60 years of corrosion having locked the brass to its spindle. She oiled it for a week. A little penetrating oil worked into the seam every night, and on the 8th night the dial moved just barely. With a groan she felt in her teeth. That was the first thing. The town had said welded shut forever, and the dial had moved. She sat down hard on the floor in front of it that night, her heart going fast, because if the dial could move, then the safe was not dead, it was only sleeping, and a sleeping thing can be woken. She told no one. That was the hardest part in its way, because the old men came in every morning and warmed themselves at her stove, and she would have given a great deal to lean on one of them, to say out loud, "The dial moved, I think they're all wrong, help me." But she had learned in the worst year of her life that a secret shared is a secret you have given away the keeping of, and that the moment this town caught the scent of possibility, it would no longer be her safe or her question or her quiet, careful work. It would be the town's, and the town had already decided what it believed. So she carried it alone, the way the old man had carried his, and there was a strange kinship in that. The two of them 60 years apart, each guarding the same iron secret in the same lamplit room, each trusting nobody, for reasons the other would have understood completely, but moving the dial and knowing the combination are two very different miseries, and she did not have the first idea what the number might be. She thought about hiring someone, and she added up what little money she had left and decided she could not. So she did the only thing left to her, which was to become, slowly, over that long, cold autumn, a kind of detective of a dead man's mind. She read everything in that store. She found his ledgers stacked in a back closet, 50 years of them, and she sat up nights by the stove reading the careful, crabbed handwriting of a man who had counted every penny of his life. It was slow, lonely work, and there were nights she felt foolish doing it. A grown woman hunched over a stranger's accounts by lamplight, while the wind clawed at the windows, chasing a number that probably did not exist into the empty box that probably held nothing. More than once she put the ledgers away and told herself to be sensible, to forget the safe, to sell the gold idea along with her marriage and her old life, and just run the store like a normal person. But every morning she woke up on her cot with that great black iron face watching her across the room, and every morning the held breath in the metal called to her again, and she would make her coffee on the pot-belly stove and sit back down with the ledgers because she had nothing left to lose and because somewhere in her chest she simply could not let it go. She learned the rhythm of his thinking from those pages, the way he abbreviated, the way he double-checked, the way certain dates recurred, marked always with a small cross in the margin, the same few dates year after year after year. She found tucked into the back of the oldest ledger a photograph gone brown with age, a young man and a young woman standing stiff and proud in front of the brand-new store, and on the back, in that same careful hand, 2 names and a date. And she understood, sitting there in the cold with that little photograph in her hands, that the man the town remembered as a friendless miser had once been a young man in love, standing in front of his dream with a girl beside him, and that something must have happened to her, because the old man had never once mentioned a wife. The date on the back of that photograph was one of the dates marked with a cross in every ledger, every single year, for 50 years. A man marks one date in the margin of his books for 50 years. A man who trusts nobody and tells nobody anything carries one number in his head that means more to him than all the money he ever counted. She thought about that for a long time. She laid the photograph on the counter under the lamp, and she went back through the ledgers one more time, slower now, hunting that little marginal cross through 50 years of figures. And there it was, year after year after year, the same month, the same day, never explained, never labeled, just a small, careful cross beside the day's accounts, as if the old man could not let that one square on the calendar pass without setting his pen against it. Some years the writing around the cross was steady and even. Some years, she noticed, the ink was heavier, the strokes pressed deeper into the paper, as though the hand that held the pen had been shaking, and she imagined him on those nights, an old man alone above his store, marking the anniversary of the best and worst day of his whole life with nobody in the world to tell. She sat with that for hours, the photograph and the ledgers and the cross, until she was as certain as a person can be of anything she has reasoned her way to instead of being told. The town carried its certainty the easy way, handed down and never tested. Hers she had built herself, board by board, out of a dead man's handwriting, and it felt heavier and truer for the building of it. Then, late on a cold night in the dead middle of winter, with the wind moaning in the tin roof and the stove ticking as it cooled, and a single work lamp throwing her shadow huge against the shelves, she knelt down in front of that great black iron safe with its little painted hills and its little gold sun. And she took the date off the back of that photograph, the month and the day and the year, and she turned the dial, right to the first number, slow, the brass groaning, left past it and around to the second, her breath held so tight her chest ached, right again to the third, her hand shaking so badly she had to stop and steady it against the cold iron, and then she reached for the great frozen handle, the one the whole town swore had rusted solid 60 years before, the one even the dead man's relatives had given up on, and she pulled. For a long, terrible moment nothing happened at all, and her heart fell through the floor, and she thought, they were right. They were all right. I am a foolish woman alone in an empty building in a town that already pities me. And then, somewhere deep inside that wall of iron, something turned. A heavy, reluctant grinding turn, the sound of bolts that had not moved in a lifetime, remembering what they were for, and she felt it travel up through the handle and into her arm and into her whole body. And she let out a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, and she pulled harder, and the great door of the safe swung open on its hidden hinges with a long, low groan, swung open for the first time in 60 years, into the lamplight, in the dead middle of a winter night, and she was looking into the heart of a thing the entire world had agreed was empty. It was not empty. I want to tell you exactly what she saw because she has told it to me since, and I want to get it right. The inside of that safe was not the rusted hollow box everyone had imagined. It was lined, fitted out, organized, the work of a careful man over a careful life. There were shelves, small iron shelves, and on them, wrapped in waxed paper and oilcloth that the dry, sealed iron had kept perfect across the decades, were bundles. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely lift the first one, and when she peeled back the waxed paper, there was money, old money, the big, beautiful bills they printed before her grandparents were born, banded in tidy stacks, more cash than she had ever seen or touched or dreamed of in one place. But that was only the beginning of it. Behind the cash, in a long, flat wooden tray lined with felt gone soft as mothwing, there were coins, gold coins, row upon careful row of them, each one in its own little paper sleeve, dates running back nearly 100 years, kept so clean and bright in that sealed iron dark that they might have been struck that morning. A man who had watched paper money turn to worthless ash in a single week had spent 50 years quietly turning his profits into the one thing he believed could never betray him. And here it was, the patient hoard of a lifetime, glowing soft and gold in the beam of her little work lamp. She sat down right there on the cold plank floor because her legs would not hold her, and she lifted out coin after coin and stack after stack, and she counted and lost count and started over, and the number she finally arrived at was a number that did not seem to belong in the same world as a 34-year-old woman sleeping on a cot in the back of a store she had bought for less than a used car. She laid it all out on the plank floor in the lamplight, the bundles and the trays and the long, bright rows of gold, and she sat in the middle of it with her arms wrapped around her knees, and she shook, not with cold, though the room was bitter, but with the sheer impossible weight of what had just happened to her life. An hour before, she had been a pitied woman with a stubborn idea. Now, she was something else entirely, and the change had taken about the length of time it takes a heavy iron door to swing open on its hinges. She thought, in that long, dizzy hour, about her husband, who had taken the savings and the good car and left her with the rest, certain he was leaving her with nothing. She thought about the realtor's tired little laugh and the old men's gentle pity and the whole town's flat, unshakable certainty, and she felt no triumph in it, none at all, only a kind of solemn wonder, as if she had been let in on a secret the universe usually keeps to itself, which is that the worth of a thing and the story people tell about it are two entirely separate matters, and that the gap between them is where every fortune and every heartbreak in this world has always hidden. But the money was not the thing that broke her. I have to tell you about the last thing because it is the part that matters most, and it is the part she cannot tell without her voice going thin. Tucked at the very back of that safe, behind all the gold and all the cash, in a small tin box, sealed with a band of wax. There was a bundle of letters, letters tied with a faded ribbon and a thin gold ring, and that same brown photograph she had already found a copy of, the young man and the young woman in front of the new store. The letters were love letters, 50 years old, in two different hands, his careful crabbed one and a looping girlish one. And the last few were not love letters at all, but the other thing, the kind a man keeps because he cannot bear to throw them away, telling of a fever and a young wife who did not survive it. In the 2nd year of their marriage, in the same winter, the banks failed. The town had lost its money that year. The old man had lost everything, and he had taken the one number that meant anything to him in all the world, the date he had married the only person he ever loved, and he had locked it into the iron, and he had spent 50 years guarding a fortune that was never really about the money at all. It was a tomb. The whole safe was a tomb, and the gold was just the wall he built around the only thing he could not bear to lose twice. She knelt there on the floor of that old store in the middle of the night with the letters in her lap and the gold all around her, and she cried, this woman who had just become richer than anyone she had ever known. She cried not for herself, but for him, for the careful, lonely man who had loved that fiercely and trusted that little, and died with the whole town believing he had nothing, when all along he had been keeping safe the most precious thing a person can keep, which is the proof that he had once been loved. I will tell you how the rest of it went, because you have earned it by listening this far. She was careful, the way the old man would have wanted. She did not run out into that pitying town the next morning crowing about gold, because she had learned the hard way what people do when they smell money. She took the coins and the certificates quietly over a long while to honest dealers 2 counties over and then further, and when it was all finally counted and sold to the right collectors, the great frozen safe that the whole town had sworn was empty had made her secure for the rest of her natural life, secure in a way she had stopped believing was possible for someone like her on the worst nights of that worst year. She paid off every debt she had. She fixed the swollen door and the broken windows and the sagging tin roof of the old store, not because she had to, but because it felt like a thing she owed the building that had kept faith with her. And she did not leave that forgotten little town the way you might expect. She stayed. She opened the store back up, a real store, the first new business on that dying Main Street in 30 years, and she lit the old pot-belly stove every morning and set the ring of mismatched chairs around it and let the old men come back to argue about the weather, and they did, gladly, never knowing as they warmed their hands what had come out of the wall they leaned against. But the letters and the ring and the photograph, those she did not keep and did not sell. She tracked down the one thing the old man had left undone, which was a single great-niece, an elderly woman herself now, 3 states away, the last of his blood, who had never known the old man had a wife at all, never knew there had been a love story buried in the family because he had locked it away with everything else. And she drove all that long way and put the letters and the ring into that old woman's hands and told her the whole of it, and the 2 of them sat at a kitchen table and read a dead man's love letters together and wept, and the old woman said it was the greatest gift anyone had given her in her whole life, to learn that the lonely uncle the family had pitied had once loved someone so completely that he built a fortress around her memory and guarded it to his grave. So that is the story, and I think about the town sometimes, the whole certain confident lot of them, every neighbor and relative and realtor who had walked past that safe their entire lives and called it empty because somebody had told them it was empty, and it was easier to believe than to check. They had 100 years to ask the question she asked. They had 100 years to oil that dial and rid those ledgers and turn that date into the number it always was. And not one of them ever did, because they all already knew, and the things we already know are the things we never look at twice. She looked, a broke, divorced, pitied woman, with nothing left but a stubborn need to put her hands on something solid. She was the only one in 100 years who stopped and looked at the great silent iron thing in the wall and asked it, quietly, "What are you really keeping?" And it told her. It opened in the dead of a winter night, and it gave her a fortune, and it gave her a man's whole secret heart, and it changed every single thing about the rest of her life. So the next time somebody tells you a thing is empty, that it's worthless, that everybody knows there's nothing there, you do yourself a kindness and remember the safe on the corner of Mill and Vine. Remember that empty is just a story people tell so they never have to do the work of looking. And remember that once, in a forgotten town the highway left behind, the one person nobody believed in was the only one who bothered to ask the question, and the iron answered her and made her rich in every single way there is to be made rich.